Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. It is 10 o'clock in the Eastern United States. My name is Steve Oken. I am the president of Core ALM, and I'll be your host for today. Shortly, I'll be introducing my guest, Danik Malademi. Danik is an expert in all topics for SAP Application Lifecycle Management. He's an expert in automating releases and change management processes using Azure DevOps, and that's what we're going to discuss today. Just as a quick introduction for anybody that is new to Core ALM, I'll give you a little bit of our history. We've been in business for over 15 years. The company started when our CEO and founder left his position at SAP, where he was the head of the application lifecycle management team. Many of our team worked at SAP before joining Core ALM, and he saw an opportunity because there was a gap in the market serving customers specifically for application lifecycle management processes and tools, specifically for SAP customers. So decided to start Core ALM to fill that space, and was very successful finding customers early on who needed expertise and services in that space. It was about 2018 when really he saw the opportunity to get into software development. What we noticed is that, of course, many companies that use SAP, they use it for many of their core processes, but they have many other applications in their landscape as well. And for those other applications, they use enterprise tools like Jira, Azure DevOps, and ServiceNow. And so really saw an opportunity to bridge with the SAP ALM tools. At the time, it was primarily SAP Solution Manager. Now we have Cloud ALM, and then there's other partners involved like Tricentis, and kind of an ecosystem of tools. But really started in 2018 with the opportunity to kind of connect Solution Manager to Jira, Azure DevOps, and ServiceNow, and it's just kind of gone from there. We have many very happy customers that have been using our tools for considerably long time, and putting large volumes through it. We cover all industries, whether it's financial, very high security environments, including military of defense, or validated processes where life sciences or pharmaceuticals. We've kind of covered it all. Of course, we work with smaller companies as well, but a lot of big companies on that list. Regardless of who we're working with, we see the transformation process as a continuous cycle. And we kind of break it into kind of three main areas. To start off with, the business has to kind of conceive what are some process improvements that you want to make as a company. And then you go through the process of managing those changes, building and maintaining the solution. And then the third step is deploying that. And really, this should be a closed loop, because ideally, when you set out to achieve those benchmarks of what your processes, how they were going to be improved, in the end, you're monitoring to see that you achieve those processes, and then you go around the cycle yet again. And that's the same cycle, whether you're doing a massive business transformation project, system upgrade, or just a general maintenance update. It should be, follow the same process. Of course, there are many tools that are, out there to support these processes, and there's capabilities that you need in order to be able to do this continuous cycle. For each of those capabilities, you have many different options as to which tools you use to support those. That can make it better, but it can also make it challenging. SAP definitely offers tools. Cloud ALM covers a big chunk of this, although it doesn't have all of the sophisticated, robust capabilities that have existed previously in Solution Manager, such as Charm or Focus Build. But it's definitely what SAP would suggest is the right tool for cloud-based application support. Of course, there's other applications from SAP or partners like Signavio, Tricentis, those types of things. And then there's enterprise tools like Jira, Azure DevOps, and ServiceNow. And this creates some complications because a lot of the time there's overlapping capabilities between those various tools, and those tools don't necessarily talk to each other well. And so what ends up being challenging is you have some people using some tools, some people using other tools within your same organization, and that information isn't exchanged, and it creates delays and challenges and sometimes inconsistencies and even errors. So really what Core ALM sees ourselves as this middle unification layer. So our job, as we see it, is to basically take all this complex landscape of all these different tools, all this data, pull it into one cohesive process that you can manage from end to end, right from the beginning to the end of your process, to support that ongoing continuous cycle. Once you do that, you'll really be able to cover, whether it's through Solution Manager, Cloud ALM, or even direct transport management, you'll be able to cover off all of the process that you need, all of those capabilities to have a seamless process. So this sort of shows kind of product-wise how we cover that entire space. But what are the benefits? And this is where we get into some of those automations that we really want to focus on for today. So going across the top, you see a kind of a standard workflow. You may have different states in your change items for your own workflows, whether you're using Azure DevOps or some other tool. And what we really want to make sure is that we use those states to automate the process of, the SAP side of the change process that, has typically been either manual or inside of Charm, or even some people are trying to use Cloud ALM for those processes. But the opportunity is to really shift left some of the processing power with automations based on the state that you're currently in. And we're going to show you today how some of that can work. So for instance, when a change is ready to be tested, you can automatically run code quality or vulnerability checks. You can manage external repositories. You can check for cross-system landscape locking issues. If you've got parallel landscapes that you're running, you can do sequencing of your transports, making sure all your dependencies are there, that you're not sending an old change on top of a newer one. You can also do change impact analysis, so you can see how those changes are adding risk to your platform, and even identify the tests that you need to run automatically so that you can make sure that those risks are mitigated. There's lots of other things that we can do, but another important aspect is actually bringing together your changes, which may be spread out across a lot of different systems. So with clean core concepts, not only are you making ABAP changes to your core SAP platform, but you also need to make changes to your BTP environment, to non-SAP applications, such as Java systems, or Node.js or other digital platforms that you may be synchronized with. And so it'd be great if you could have a process to manage all of those changes in one system. And that's really what we're going to show you how that works today. If you're interested in this topic and you want to delve deeper than what we cover in today's webinar and demo, you can go to the LinkedIn. There's a newsletter on our company page, which is called the SAP ALM Navigator. Scan the barcode in the top right corner of your screen. We just did release 2 newsletters on the topic of automations with ADO. They kind of go hand in hand and tell the whole story in a little bit more depth. Also on our website, if you're interested in this topic, we're just about to release the titles for Q1 of 2026. Can't believe I'm saying that, but we're almost there. And so we'll have a bunch of new webinars that you can sign up for. If you can't make the time that's listed, still do register for the webinar, and we'll make sure to send you a recording at the end of the session. And then if you want to get in touch and do an actual tailored demonstration or answer a specific question that you might have, you can go to our website. In the top right corner of your screen, you'll see the Talk to an Expert button. Click on that and fill out the form. We'll get back to you right away. Or you can scan the barcode on the bottom right corner of your screen. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my guest for today, Donik Molademi. Welcome, Donik.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Steve. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
I can.
All right, thank you. And then I'll start sharing my screen shortly.
Thank you.
Okay, please confirm when you can see the Azure DevOps.
You're good. You're good to go.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So during the session today, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the application once it's deployed in Azure DevOps, some of the configuration, flexibility that we have and capabilities. And then we're going to go through taking an issue type, in this case, a user story. We're going to take it through its life cycle. And then along the way, we're going to process transports. We're going to create SAP transports, and we're going to move them through the landscape from development to QA to production. But pretty much all of the actions are going to be executed from Azure DevOps. The process today is going to be a little bit manual in terms of clicking of the buttons because we wanted to make sure that we can talk about the steps in the process. But I'll also talk about how we can automate some of these steps upon status change, some of the transport actions, and then some of the activities that do happen automatically in the background, some of the checks that Steve mentioned, some of the transport checks that we perform, those are executed automatically in the background. So before we begin, once our tool is deployed, or the extension is deployed in Azure DevOps, what it'll do, it'll give us capabilities to connect to different landscapes. And what I mean by landscapes is your your ABAP systems. It could be cloud-based changes or ABAP-based changes, but in this case, let's just assume that it's ABAP changes. So it'll connect to your S4 environments. It could be your ECC, your BW, if you have some of the legacy systems. So this is where we would define the connectivity. Then once we define the connectivity for each of the landscapes, we have the mapping page. In this case, what we do is we map the Azure project with issue type. In this case, I'm going to bring up the user story. And what we do then is we assign a landscape to that particular issue type. And as the end result, what we get is a status mapping page where we're able to map the statuses of your Azure DevOps issue type. So these could be standard out of the box, or it could be a customized status, or it could be a customized workflow that you have built in Azure DevOps, and we can go ahead and use that particular issue type and map buttons against the statuses that are defined. In this case, what we're saying that is in status work in progress. We have the first 4 entries relate to the status work in progress, and what we're able to do is bring action buttons into the application, such as ability to create a transport, create a task, couple transports, and decouple transports. And then when we go to status ready for testing, we can perform different actions on existing transports, things like create and import TOC, releasing the transport, and then in successfully tested, import into the test system, and then go into production. And then after production, we have the retrofit. What this means is that in each of these statuses, we can execute different actions. And then in this case, we can build an end-to-end process where we guide the user essentially through the process, where they have to select specific fields. Certain fields can be mandatory, certain automations can be made. But essentially, upon transition of statuses, for example, from work in progress to ready for testing, for example, one of the actions can be automated, and we'll talk about that. But for today, at least these will be represented with buttons that we can click, which will execute an action. And then another area of the application is the mass import, and we'll talk about this when we automate things at the release level. So, for example, we have multiple issue types that go through development phase, through the testing phase, and then before we deploy to production. We can hold all of those user stories, and then we can import the batch of user stories into production when it's ready. But in this case, let's just say we have all the user stories, and then we select a system. In this case, let's just say this is our production system. We can list all the issue types that could be in progress or could be in some status that are ready to go to production. And then we can execute mass import from this screen. But before we get to this, let's look at our existing work items, and let's go ahead and create a new work item of type user story, because typically user stories are going to be related to deliverables in terms of SAP transports, most likely. However, our tool is flexible. As you saw on the mapping page, we can actually map those buttons to any issue type. In this case, we're just using user stories for our example today. So upon creation, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to give it a title. I'm going to assign it to someone, and I'm going to just add a description. You might see fields in here that are not standard. These are just this particular instance of Azure DevOps is used for multiple areas of demonstrations that we do. So you might see some fields that do not pertain to our demo today, nor are they in standard Azure DevOps. So just wanted to let you know. So then we're going to go ahead and fill out some of the required or some of the fields in our form. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to save this particular change. So, this particular issue type or user story. So what I want to get your attention to is this SAP transport detail, which this is what will be displayed upon successful deployment of the tool. And what we will see is when we go to the SAP transport tab, right now we only see a refresh button, but nothing else, because we mentioned, if you recall, on the mapping page, we said that no actions are related to the status ready. However, if we begin work on a specific user story, once I fix the status, and let's just say I'm the assigned developer or configurator, once I navigate being in the correct state, then going into the SAP Transport tab, I will be presented with different action buttons. And if you remember, we had the create transport, create task, couple, and decouple as the defined action buttons that are going to be available in the screen. And the refresh button will always be displayed. So the first step in our on this journey, actually, it will be the creation of the transport. And what I'm going to go ahead and is provide a description for the transport, because we get this pop-up message, and then we select our development system. So for each user story, what we can do is we can create one or more transports that is related to one landscape, or we can have one or more transports that are related to different landscapes. If we had defined multiple landscapes to be available to user stories, what we would then get is an ability to select our development system. So if we had an S4 and a BW, those would show up as two different development systems. However, in this case, we only have one, and we are going to select system TRI050, which is going to be our development client. We then have client TRI066, which is our QA, and then 099, which is our production. So we're going to say in client TRI050, I want to create a customizing request, and the user I want to do it for is Donic. So what we're going to do is, once we click on search, we're going to make a call to the backend system, and we're going to resolve for this user. So we're going to make sure that the user exists and it's authorized to create transports, to own transports before we display that, and all those checks are performed automatically in the background. In addition to that, we can create one or more tasks for the transport that's going to be created. And that's if we want to distribute the work to multiple configurators, if we don't know who's going to get to work on that issue first. But in this case, we can do one or more. And if we leave it blank, it's just going to default to one task being created for the given transport. And it'll be assigned to the same user. And then last but not least is we have the manual steps section. And what the manual steps section allows us to do is it allows us to check essentially the box and provide some details around pre-import steps. So if there are any steps that need to be executed before this specific transport is imported, we will check that box, provide the instructions on the text box, and so the user will be stopped before they try to import a transport in a system. They'll be stopped and will be provided the opportunity and the description of what was provided in that box for the steps that they need to execute. And likewise, for the steps that are after the import, it's going to be the same as the ones before, which means that you'll get a pop-up after the transport's been imported to make sure that you execute the of the transport import steps. And then upon acknowledging that pop-up, it's also captured digitally to ensure that that step that's confirmed by the person, it's captured that who confirmed that they understood that those steps need to be executed and that they were executed. In this case, for the demo today, I'm just going to go ahead and leave them turned off, but we do have that opportunity. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is hit create, which is going to begin a process of creating a transport directly in our system TRI-050 that I mentioned earlier. So what we do have now is, and I'm going to go ahead and bring my SAP system right next to the transport data here. And what I want to show you is in system TRI-050, which is the development system. I'm filtering by the user, customizing request, and then modifiable transport. And what we will notice is that this transport with task 1687 and transport with number 1686 has been created. And we can see the same information in Azure DevOps with the transport number and then the task number, along with details about it, such as like what type of transport it is, who the owner is, what the current status is, and the description of the transport. If we zoom into the description, what we'll notice is that what we provided in Azure DevOps is we just said webinar November 26th. However, what we do is we add the prefix to the description of the transport, and the prefix is going to be the user story ID or task ID or whatever element you're using from Azure DevOps. Its ID is going to be presented as part of the prefix of the transport. So at any point in time, if you go into the S4 system, anybody's looking around for any transport, you can automatically associate the transport with the issue ID, in this case, user story ID of Azure DevOps. So you can kind of see where the relationship and the traceability matrix, you can start building that. And the same concept will be carried over into other things that we generate, like the TOC and retrofit, and all these details will contain these ticket numbers and transport numbers. So it'll be very easy for anybody to be able to trace in the future where each transport, what change each transport is related to. Okay, so we have created the transport. We see the transport that we have different, we talked about the prefix. Then we have the capability to couple. So if we have a transport that was created that already exists, or that maybe that was decoupled from another user story, and you realize that the transport actually belongs in a different user story. So we have the capability of decoupling and coupling changes. So in this case, you could couple something that was decoupled elsewhere, or if you don't like a transport and you want to abandon it, and all the conditions are met, you can decouple it and then delete the transport. So we have all these capabilities. However, for the demo today, what I'm going to go ahead and do is perform a change on the system. And I'm just going to create a new table entry in this particular table. And let's take a look at what we have, what the last entry is. So we're creating these address routines. So we're just going to create a new one with number 536. It looks like that's the next one in line. And it's a unique entry. We're going to hit save, and then we're going to be prompted to record our change. Or capture our change in the transport. And in this case, what we're going to do is obviously we have to make sure that we select the appropriate change request. But in this case, I'm just going to select the transport, and I'm going to save the changes in that transport. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the transport area, and I'm going to display the transport that I just created. And you can see here the contents of the transport have already been updated. And essentially, I'm going to release the task. And notice I'm not releasing the transport. I'm just releasing the task to signify that I'm done with my configuration unit, if you will. And this will allow for us to create POCs and take the change forward. So we have released the change. And if I hit refresh here and I select the transport again, what I'll be able to see is an update that I have now in in Azure DevOps that indicates that the task is released. At this point, we can go ahead and change the status to ready for testing, for example. And what you'll notice is upon changing of the status, when we come into the SAP Transport tab, now what we'll notice is that we have different buttons that are available to us. And in this case, we are in testing phase or unit testing phase. And in this case, what we're going to be able to do is create and import a TOC into the QA system so we can perform the testing. Now, right now, this particular step is not automated, but this is a potential candidate for future automation, meaning as soon as we switch the status to ready for testing, the very first automated step that could be executed is the create and import TOC action. We left it manual just so we can see that we have the control, but essentially we can automate that to where a snapshot of the transport 1686 is taken and is sent to the, or at least it's made available to the, and imported into the QA system automatically so you can perform the testing. And after I clicked on the button, what we will notice now is that in the TOC section of this transport is that we will have a new number here, which is a TOC number. And this is the first transport of copies with number 1688. That is, it's essentially a TOC from the original transport for the webinar. And as you can see here, all the prefix and all the information is maintained. So if I go into STMS and I look at my transports and what happened, and I'm going to refresh now, what we should notice, and let me go here, okay. What we will notice is that we have a TOC or transport of copies that was imported, came out of client 050, which is our development client, and it got imported into client 060, which is our QA client. And you can see here it's a TOC from the original transport, and it's related to that to the webinar and related to this particular user story. So you can see now how this traceability matrix is being built in every transport and every TOC that's being sent in the system. So at this point, we have moved the change to QA. We can perform our test in QA, and if we're not happy with the results, we can go back and change the status to work in progress, create an additional task, perform additional configuration changes, and push another TOC to QA, and that circle or cycle can be executed as many times as needed until satisfactory results are achieved during testing. In this case, let's just say we got it right on the first time. We will go ahead and release the transport. And we can go ahead and execute the release action because we've performed the testing. And before releasing the transport, this is where we have the opportunity to add any attachments, anything that would be required by the process for us to add as evidence, test evidence, and whatnot. Now, in our instance, we don't have a lot of those things built in, but if you do have them built in your instance, all of those rules will remain intact, and no changes would be required from our perspective. Just the additional action buttons that would be made part of that process. Okay, so now what we see is we executed the release of transport, so we can see the status of the transport has been released, and the next thing that we do, we can mark it as successfully tested. As soon as we mark the request or the user story as successfully tested, when we go back into SAP Transport tab, what we notice now is that we have the capability of importing the transport. Because now we've successfully tested, we need to import the transport into a QA system as soon as possible. And because we've tested with TOC, and now it's time to import the real transport. Now, this is another step that can be automated upon entering the status of successfully tested. This could be one of the very first things that's executed, importing the transport into the QA system. And upon execution of import, now that we're doing it manually, and this is part of the reason why we want to do it manually, so we see some of the options that we get. We can certainly, we get the options that we do get when we execute the import in TMS, which is some of these options about ignoring, overwriting originals, and so forth. These can be hidden. They don't have to be displayed, but I just wanted to show this import request screen because we have opportunities to select the options. However, we have opportunities to also schedule the import of this transport. So, for example, if you have more than one, you can schedule the import for a later time, date, time, or an event. But in this case, we're just going to execute an immediate import without selecting any of the options. And what you'll notice is that when clicking on some of these actions, you'll notice that the loading or executing messages are displayed. And I'll talk about the reason for that, because there's a very good reason. But at least we can see that we're progressing through the change. And now we can see that last import was done in client TRI060, which is our QA client. And the history, when we look at it, it was exported out of 050, it was imported into 060, and so forth. So now that we have successfully tested this chain or this user story, the next thing would be to put it in status approved for production. And what we're going to do is we're going to hit save and approve for production. And then when we switch over back to the transport, what we'll notice is that now we have the import transport visible again, which will mean for production deployment. Now, if there's anything else required in the form, any other field that needs to be populated, any other details, if you require any approvals, if any of those things are built into the tool, we can make those dependencies before the import transport button is displayed. So we can add controls where we have to rely on another field, for example, to let us know that it's ready to import, or we can just do it based on the stats. However, in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and import into production. Same concept as we did in QA. We got the pop-up prompting us if we want to take advantage of any of these capabilities. If not, we can just click import. What I forgot to mention is that another pop-up we would have gotten during the import screen if we had selected the checkbox to say that there are pre-import steps. This is where we would have gotten that other message to indicate to say that before the import, please execute steps 1, 2, 3. And then the person that would acknowledge it, they would be recorded as the one stating that yes, those steps were executed. Then you're presented with a screen to execute the actual import of the transport. And then upon execution, we're going to get the message again that loading or actions are being executed in the background, and we will visit those actions here shortly. So as that's happening in the background, if I refresh my buffer, a lot would have happened since our last entry that we had for the TOC. So 1255 row was the last thing we looked at. So what we did is we released the transport, and then we imported it into the QA system, 050 to 060. We have an entry here, which I'll describe in a little bit. But then the last but not least is we have the same transport going to client 099. So we saw that a change was created, the TOC was created for it, we released the transport, imported into QA, which then got added to the buffer of production, and then we imported it into production. All of these actions were executed directly from Azure DevOps. So that's straightforward enough as far as executing the change and moving into production. And then what we're going to say is that this change is complete. And then upon completion, we decided in this status, for no particular reason, but we just decided to say that, okay, once the change has gone to production, we want to be able to retrofit this change, whether it's an M+1 or you want to synchronize other development landscapes. So in this case, what we do have is the capability to execute the retrofit analysis. And remember, the button retrofit analysis, we could have chosen at whatever step we wanted to execute this. So for example, if the transport was released out of the development system, we could have executed the retrofit automatically right after the transport is released. However, in this case, we just said we actually want to retrofit after it's gone to production, which also can be automated, but in this case, we're just leaving it manual. Okay, so upon executing the retrofit analysis, we see the very last section here of the transport details area. We see the retrofit section, and what we're going to get here is some details about the change 1686. So upon analysis, we found out that we can take the change 1686 and import it into client 100, which is our N+1 development client, still in the same system, but it's N+1 development. And we said we can retrofit into client 100, and we're going to use retrofit TOC 1689, and its retrofit category is green. That means there are no conflicts in the N+1 environment, and there are no dependencies. No, there are no other prerequisite transports that need to go in before this one can be retrofitted. And because both of these are green, that means we are allowed to execute retrofit into the system TRI 100. Now let's assume that we had more than one N+1 more than one development environment, N+1, N+2, and so forth. If we had configured those in our landscape, you would see those displayed down here. So if we had two development landscapes that we would feed, we would see another system here. Let's say TRI 200 would be our N+2, and so forth. TRI 300 would be, and then you would be able to select those systems. And if each of those is green, we can select those and then import retrofit into all of them, or single system at a time. In this case, we're just going to go ahead and import the retrofit into client 100. And then what I'll do is that's executing. I'll go back to my buffer, and if you recall, we said that 1689 was the retrofit TOC, so we're going to use that TOC to import into client 100, and then we do the object conversion, the original system, any of those properties that need to be switched or changed, so the development system becomes the new owner of those objects and the original system, and then that particular change is exported with another TOC locally, and from client 100 to 110, which this is our QA client in the N+1 environment. So what we've done is we've made a change in development, have imported into QA, imported into production, retrofit into N+1 development client, and then we retrofit into QA client of N+1. Now, once I hit refresh, this should have been completed, the import process. And our user story has been updated, and upon selection, we will see that the auto import log, it was successful. We were able to successfully retrofit into N+1, and we see that 1689 was used with the retrofit TOC into the development, and then 1690 was into the client 110. This concludes the entire cycle of taking a change from development all the way to production and then retrofitting into N+1. Now, throughout the life cycle of this user story, there were actions that were executed along the way. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the comments. And in the comments, what we're going to see is entries that are added. For example, the ability for us to, when we created the transport, so we have logs on when the transport was created. We have the log into the importing the TOC, if you remember, the create and import TOC button that we click. But remember I said there was the wheel that was spinning, or the clock that was running, the system was processing. Well, what was happening in that step is that certain activities, automated activities, are being executed. For example, we're running cross-reference check for that particular transport request. In this case, we're checking, or if the object has been, or the same object is being modified in two development landscapes, because we want to make sure when they go to production, they go into the correct order. We also have, cross-system object locking, and then we do cross-reference checks. So cross-reference checks, we make sure that all the transport's prerequisites are completed in the target system. So for example, if I have a report that's referencing an include, but the include doesn't exist in my target system, we're going to raise a red flag and not going to let you export because we know it's going to fail. So why let the action execute? Similarly, we check for cross-system object locking, and then we do a sequence check or downgrade protection check. to make sure that if that object's being modified in another transport, whether it's in N or N+1, we want to make sure that they go into production in the right order. So then we perform those checks, and then we provide details about the TOC was created, was successful, and then we did the description change because we add the prefix, and then the release is successful, and then we have a successful import. So for every one of the actions, so for example, in here we did the TOC. Well, then we released the actual transport, so we perform the checks again. Then we have the importing of the transport into QA. We perform checks before importing into QA. And then we have import of the same change into production. And the same thing is being checked. When we go, you see every time the system is different. In this case is our QA. In this case is our production. And then last but not least, once we reach the last state, we also notice that we executed the retrofit. And here are the retrofit details, everything that I discussed. The original TOC that was used, essentially all the objects, everything that is being done on the ticket, including the return code. Some of this logging can be increased or decreased, depending, on how we want to operate. If we have an issue, we can increase the logging and get more details. But this is the idea. Then, if we go look at the history of the ticket, we can see here on the left side, we can see essentially everything that happened in the ticket with date, time, who did it, which person, what updated, and we can see along with all of the related details with transport numbers. So auditors really enjoy this because they don't have to go into multiple systems to see all the details, because they'll have all the details, the transport, who approved, and as you can imagine, in our system is pretty vanilla or pretty close to the out-of-the-box configuration, but as you can imagine, there's all sorts of automations and things that are built in Azure DevOps, and our goal was to really integrate as seamlessly as possible in what you already have in your system, so we don't have to introduce and make a lot of changes. So this is moving a change all the way to production. Now, if we had chosen to go to QA and then have multiple changes waiting for a deployment window to go to production, we mentioned that we have the capability, when we talked about the configuration screen, we have the capability to do mass import. So we can execute mass import of transports into production, for example, based on another field. So we could have a field called release, and then you can group changes by release, select them, perform the transport checks, and then execute the import. Now, whether you execute the import individually or in mass, we do not skip the checks. If you import the transport one by one, our check will check that particular transport against all the other transports that are in the landscape. However, if you select a batch of 10 transports, let's say, the program will execute those 10 transports against all the other transports and all the objects to make sure that they can go together as one unit. So all those checks, and then those can be obviously scheduled for later import, or they can be imported as needed or ad hoc. So with that said, this kind of takes us through the end-to-end process. And just remember that all these buttons that are visible here, these can be automated to be executed automatically, like upon status change, or maybe on another field. There's ways to automate execution of these actions. With that said, that was our goal for today. And I wanted to see, Steve, if you have any input or if there are any questions.
Thank you. You covered a lot there. Definitely very interesting subject matter. I can definitely see the automation. Obviously, Azure DevOps has a lot of pipeline automation capabilities built into it, but being able to add that SAP transport piece to the mix just creates even more opportunity. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to put those into the chat, or you can type them into the chat or to the question area on your screen. I do have a couple of questions that have already been entered. The first question is, what do I have to do to install this in my environment?
The installation, yeah. So the installation is delivered. So this application is made up of two components, if you will, or two. One is the extension or the plugin on the Azure DevOps side, which is available on the shared repository. Once we publish it and make it authorize it. And so that's the Azure DevOps side, which is easy, just like any other extension, very easy deployment. For the SAP side, we do have a transport, which brings in our code in its own namespace, so there won't be any conflicts during upgrade and or with your existing functionality. Namespace is registered with SAP. So you deploy an external transport into your development system, and essentially that's what it takes to get it installed. So essentially a transport
How long does
and
it
a
take to
plugin.
go through those steps generally?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry for interrupting. And yeah, so it doesn't sound too complicated, but how long does it take usually to go through those steps?
Oh, for the installation, the plugin, it takes minutes. The transport, it does take minutes to import. Now, when it comes to configuration, obviously we have to, I mentioned earlier in the configuration screen, we would have to define the target systems and whatnot. So it's just more of, entering the data in the system, creating those connections, identifying the systems to each other. So that configuration, it's not long at all, especially once we identify those, that can be done in a week or two. If we have all the information, that can be done very quickly, actually in a couple of days. Usually what takes a little bit longer is the connectivity between the two, because that's the third part, that's the unknown part to us, because we have to work with other vendors to achieve connectivity. So that's going to be the longest pole in the tent. And that's the unknown part. The known parts are literally like a couple of days. And then the design and connectivity is going to be the longer portion.
Yeah, so obviously Azure DevOps is a cloud-based system. So, we have to establish safe connectivity. Well, the customer has to establish safe connectivity from their environment, SAP environment, to Azure DevOps. There's lots of different ways to do this. We've kind of covered it off with some very high security companies. So it can be done. It's just a bit of a process that takes some time to figure out. But sounds good. Next question is really around coupling or withdrawing a change. Let's say you're in the process of doing something, you decide you don't want to take it forward. How do you back out or just decide not to go forward with that change?
Oh, good question. Yeah. So now that's going to be more of a process question. So that's something that we would have to sit together and decide what can happen at what state, because decoupling is very easy, right? We can disassociate a transport with a user story. The problem is that the objects that it contains, what do we do with that? And how far down the landscape it has moved. For example, let's say if it's in development, you just capture some objects, make a couple of changes, you can undo those changes and we can leave the transport in dev, decouple, no problem. But if it's in QA, then we just slightly be a different procedure because we need to undo those changes. So that will be built into the process. So that if you want to withdraw, you must undo the changes, move them to QA, the do and undo, and then withdraw both of them. But that would be a process that we would have to come up with as this is being designed.
And we have standard ways to do that. Of course, that's a common thing to do. Everybody has a slightly different approach. Our general recommendation, especially if something's already progressed or moved into QA, is that you provide some kind of reversing change to go behind that. That could be attached to the same Azure DevOps work item as a new transport, and that will neutralize it, because you want to make sure that your development environment and your QA environment are staying in sync, and you want to make sure that those changes don't go further than production. So, there's different ways to do it. It depends a little bit on your configuration, which is why it's something that gets covered off as part of the implementation design. But those are simple scenarios. We have to do it every single time because that's always a case, but consider the state that it's in, as Dominic mentioned. Okay, great. I don't think there's any other questions. Thank you, Dominic, very much for sharing all of this with us. Happy to see these automations are there. Great to see everybody. It's coming up to, if you're based in the US, it's coming up to Thanksgiving. If you're not, if you're in Europe, then hope everybody's doing well. If you're joining from the web and you're watching this as a recording, thanks for making it all the way to the end of our presentation for today. We hope to see you on future webinars. Please do come back. We have lots of exciting topics. We have one more webinar this year, and we're just preparing our list of webinars for the first quarter of 2026. All right, thanks all very much. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye now.